Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
In case you somehow missed it, the Super Bowl happened on Sunday. Can you guess which commercials got Michael and David's attention?
So you can't stop with the Super Bowl commercial music in your head.
Don't stop me now. Well, I was a big Queen fan and Flash Gordon.
All right, so tell me, what's the background of that song? Because I knew it was Queen, but I didn't know the song.
It was used in the Flash Gordon movies. Another great vocal performance by Freddie Mercury, great hook, used in a sci-fi movie. Probably went completely dormant until Bohemian Rhapsody, the movie, came out, and they chose it for the closing credits, and it got a resurgence. For the significance of what we're about to talk about, it is a song that's been used quite a bit in television commercials. So One of the things was interesting to do that for Pfizer to try to sell you science, history, and rock equals trust us with your health. But Freddie Mercury would die very young and prematurely.
Yeah, so there was this commercial, and it was a movie. It had to be very expensive to produce that piece. First off, they had the licensing rights, clearly. But then they had to do some very sophisticated video. Now, if it had just been a Ken Burns, span the pictures type thing, scan them, whatever, pan left to right, up, down, that would have been one thing. But they chose to animate those photos. So now they put additional layers of money. So they spent a good amount of money on that piece. And the worldview message on that piece in regards to the Super Bowl audience was massive. Before we get to that, Super Bowl audience, are you buying it? Was it 123 million? You buy that there was that many people watching?
Well, you're asking me to buy Nielsen. I buy the official, unofficial Nielsen projections, yes. And that would make sense with all the added interest Taylor Swift, an audience that Taylor Swift has brought to things.
Well, do you think that sports wagering had something to do with it as well?
Sports wagering is not new. People have always bet the Super Bowl. More are doing it legally on their devices than with a local bookie. But yeah, the proliferation of that, along with Taylor Swift, both, I guess, could be the answer. But I mean, we had online gaming last year, and it beat it by another 10 million, and that's about what they projected with all the new audience that Taylor Swift has brought.
So there is no other event in the American experience that causes that kind of television set concentration. Now, we don't know how many eyes are on the set. People are doing parties, it's turned on, but there's nothing even remotely close to it. If we're talking about a weekend or a daily, and a program hits 10, 12 million people, it rocks the world. It's huge.
The question is, if you have a large audience like this, is it worth $7 million to reach them? You bring up, just because you have a total audience of, doesn't mean they weren't in the bathroom, they weren't talking to somebody, they weren't getting something to eat, they might have missed it. But by and large,
I turn the volume down. Yeah.
Well, Tony Romo will do that to you. But the point is, if you have something new, like RFK's commercial or Pfizer, if they're trying to reach people with a counter culture or cultural message, probably still a wise spot, I'm sure. But there's no anticipation of the commercials like there were 20 years ago. There's no pre-talk about the commercials. There's no real talk afterwards about the commercials. So I don't know that it has the impact it used to.
But the Pfizer spot is huge. It's huge. There weren't any other drug commercials that I saw. Pfizer spent the $7 million that we probably gave them through COVID. And Pfizer decided to tell us that they now are the animators and the storytellers of what science really means. They went back and captured up a dozen or more moments of science, which basically said that it all flows to who we are and where we are. And they put the founding of Pfizer right in there next to Copernicus, a publicly traded big pharma company saying, we are science. I'm surprised they didn't put a picture of Fauci in there, because Fauci said he was science. And so now Pfizer's telling us that they are science. And that it's as if there's an ordination from the universe and the natural world that was waiting for Pfizer to be here. Add Freddie Mercury into it, and then we get to the big close. And what's the big close? Not we own you, not we control your life, not we just ran you through 2 years of a pandemic in which we made tens of billions of dollars off of you and through creating more deficits in your government. No, they turn the final piece, and what is it? And we're about to cure cancer, so you can't live without us. That sucks.
He chooses his word carefully and says that sucks.
Because it does.
Well, it's not real science, and they're not scientists. It's not real history or complete history, if not revised history, and what it has to rock with rock and roll music. That's just to spur a feeling, and you know the role of feelings. They're everything.
The bottom line is they want us as hooked on them as Purdue Pharma wanted us hooked on opioids.
Or Big Tobacco wanted us hooked on cigarettes.
Or the gambling industry wants us hooked on gambling.
Or the marijuana industry wants us hooked on gummies.
There you go. This is a world of distractions and addictions. And in that commercial, I think it was a 1 minute spot. I don't think it was 30 seconds. It had to be a minute. In that 1 minute, they basically brought together the distraction of America and the addiction of America. America's great distraction, the Super Bowl, and America's great addiction. Thank you, Pfizer. There it was.
And what's interesting is the next day, the CDC, this is a story in the Washington Post, initiates their plans to drop the 5-day COVID isolation guidelines. So
I'm sorry.
Well, I mean,
how did you feel when you first read that story?
Well, look, it would be one thing if we didn't see the Milken Institute video where they were all talking about a new vaccine technology and how long it would take and how expensive it'll be and all the tests we have to go through and the time that it takes and the billions of dollars it takes. And then one scientist goes, well, we could just have like an emergency, like some kind of a pandemic out of China. And then, of course, it happens a month later. But I would say
some kind of a flu-like virus.
No, they were very specific. And then it happened 1 month later.
A corona-type virus. Yes, that could happen.
And Fauci was at that table going along with it. Yeah, that would do it. And it certainly did. Having said that, it would have been one thing had they made some mistakes. We would have given them grace for that.
Sure.
But they never acknowledged those mistakes. They still don't acknowledge those mistakes. And therefore, it just sits there like a weapon that is being preserved to be used again in the future. And that's what makes everybody concerned. There were a lot of mistakes that were made on purpose.
Yeah. And anybody who disagrees with them is the enemy.
Yes.
I mean, there's no dialogue.
Well, isn't that what that ad is ultimately trying to address?
Say that again?
Isn't that what that ad is ultimately trying to address? In case you've got any, second thoughts about vaccines or an anti-vaxxer or, you better get on board with COVID or you won't be there when we get to cancer. I mean,
because yes, the bus won't have a seat for you because we are science and you are not worthy.
Can you imagine if Ford said, get on board with our Ford electric cars or guess what? We'll make sure you don't drive ever.
Ever again. Yeah. No, that's actually, Ford won't do that because they're getting the money from the government. It's the government that's going to say that. Yeah. And that's how fascism works. And what is fascism? It's that union of government extortion and private corporations. Gee whiz. How does that work? Which leads us to another commercial that was on, which surprised me. I don't know. I think you may have been asleep by the time this commercial showed up, or you were about to sleep because I jumped out of my chair and immediately texted you in capitals, which I very rarely do. Did you see that commercial?
I assume you're talking about RFK's version of Jack's commercial?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was up for that. I didn't move to my bed until the halftime show, but my phone was charging.
The world wants to know. Did you write the commercial?
No, and nor did RFK's PAC. They just took the audio and visuals of the original Jack Kennedy 1960 television ad, and that apparently offended a couple of obscure Kennedy family members, which I found was a ridiculous story, but RFK apologized to them. I think it boiled down to Eunice's image was slipped in without permission. I think Jack would have loved the idea. I think Jack, and I think his father, by the way, Jack Kennedy was a great leader. He was a great mind in the Senate. and in the presidency and surrounded himself with great minds. Bobby was the real campaign strategist. And so I think his father would have said, that's smart. Because it does three things. It gets us having three conversations. One is the Kennedy name still Camelot? Is the Kennedy name still the greatest or tied for the greatest Democrat franchise in history? You know, you got FDR, you got Kennedy. They're probably going to throw in Obama. Clinton's the one that won't stand the time of history. And perhaps, other than scandal, should, because he presided over the best economy. But if they're a dynasty
with the Republican Congress, I might say.
Well, your friend Newt gets half the credit for that, as Tip O'Neill should get half the credit for that.
Yeah.
But I digress. I will say it puts Democrats in the position, oh my gosh, this is our Abe Lincoln. And this is his nephew. This is his bloodline. These are the matriarchs of our party, which if you reject it, you have to admit how much that party has left. The party today, the Democrat Party today, is so far left of Ted Kennedy, who was unrecognizable from Jack Kennedy, let alone Bobby Kennedy, that makes the ad absolutely brilliant. The nostalgia of it, the message it sends to older Democrat voters, which they weren't interested in having Robert Kennedy under the tent and challenging Joe Biden. So he goes independent. And that's a great tactical, strategic. It's really a strategic and tactical piece towards Democrat voters.
Did you
on the
just
older
coin a
end.
new term in politics? Wait a minute.
Well, it's an old term in radio, but yeah, there are tactics and then there are strategic initiatives. Sometimes when you combine them and it's a strategic tactic, we called it tactigic. But in this case, I thought it was brilliant to bring back all those great feelings, remind you this is the nephew of Jack Kennedy and the son of Bobby Kennedy, a much better Democratic Party, much better minds and leadership than what you have now. And really, quite frankly, David, if life is about feelings, a much better time in America.
The song was catchy, even though I think it would win the award for saying the word Kennedy the most in a single minute.
Kennedy. You know, it's very 1960.
By going totally retro, it got your attention. But Kennedy had the courage to drop $7 million to get that spot.
His PAC did.
His PAC did, yes. His PAC had the courage, which in and of itself is pretty significant, which means there's definitely momentum out there. Now, there are some people that are pretty darn convinced that that money is really Trump money, because if Kennedy Kennedy could actually become Trump's insurance policy. That's the theory. Now, I don't know if that's in fact reality. We don't know. We never know with an independent candidate. Nobody expected Ross Perot to do it as well as he did, but it didn't matter because, in essence, he did not win any electoral college votes, but he probably cost George H.W. Bush the election.
He absolutely did. But I would say we could make a statement today, but it would be based on the second week of February, which is a long way from the late weeks of October or November that matter. So, but I would suggest that I think RFK's in this to win it, and I think there's a path for him to actually win it. Is it a long shot? It looks like it, but it's a much better path than Ross Perot. He's 2 to 2.5 times more popular than Ross Perot and far more recognizable with the Kennedy name, thus the Kennedy ad. And I think you got problems in mid-February where Biden is too old to charge with the same thing you charged President Trump with because he's cognitively impaired. And if he's cognitively impaired, then he's too cognitively impaired to be president. And then if he's cognitively strong enough to be president, then he's cognitively strong enough to be charged. So they're caught in a chicken and egg. Then he bans TikTok for national security reasons, rightfully. And then he's doing a TikTok ad on Super Bowl Sunday instead of an interview with CBS. That's a backlash. Meanwhile, Trump says Russia should attack, especially these NATO countries that aren't paying their fair share. I mean, as the Super Bowl goes, RFK gets the win. I'll say that safely.
Well, the irony is that two of the biggest spots on the Super Bowl were Pfizer and RFK Jr. How interesting. You could not have two more strategic opponents vying for public attention. I just think that's a moment of irony.
There's another layer to that too, David. When you think about the strongest Trump supporters are the most anti-vax, anti-COVID handling of COVID people in America, and they haven't connected the dots that most of it was done to them by Donald Trump. Put that into the mix before we bake this cake.
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
So you mentioned the Her report and the inconsistencies, and we've all seen what ended up happening there. I got to tell you, there's a interesting article that came out. Now, you and I, as soon as the Her report blew up on Thursday afternoon, curiously though, it blew up right in time to be completely lost and dismissed in the Super Bowl distraction. I don't think that's coincidental. I think that thing was released by design, maybe even pressured to be released in that moment. In any case, and we don't know who had an advance. I mean, you have to believe the Justice Department had advance notice. You had to believe, but okay. The report comes out and it basically says, guilty in regards to, yes, there were documents there. Yes, they were being disclosed. Yes, he was aware that there was classified questions and so on and so forth, but he didn't mean to do anything wrong. And eventually, if this were ever to get into a courtroom, he's too old to basically stand trial effectively. No jury's going to convict him. So, okay, there it comes out. Well, everybody goes, okay. And the first thought is, this is just like Comey with Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. What she did with the surveys, what she did with classified documents, and it was all guilty, but probably not going to get a conviction, so we'll walk away. And everybody went, how in the world? That had a huge impact on the election.
Yeah, and we always talk about October surprises. What we're really asking is, will this election be decided by a February surprise? And I think the difference is, I don't know how much, I didn't sense that much interest in the Super Bowl. I think it came out in time for people to hear this report and catch it. And I think but it's doubly damaging because they already have this convinced opinion. 86% of the American people think Joe Biden's too old. It's an elephant in the room that only the handlers of this administration continue to ignore. And therefore, I think, whether people were distracted by the Super Bowl or not, this is a firm opinion they have. This creates either an LBJ or a Jimmy Carter moment if you continue to move forward. And then I think the other question is, and based on what the DNC is doing to attack Robert Kennedy, I think what they fear most is an RFK moment, not an LBJ, Well, actually, that'd be ironic because it was Bobby Kennedy that forced LBJ out.
So you've got this situation where this story breaks, and let's go back historically. In the old days, like Watergate, the media, especially the New York Times and the Washington Post, would have been all over this story looking to pull every single thread of this report and every single thread about the documents and challenging everything. It would almost be like the media would go in neutral, but they were hoping to take down whoever was in power.
Sure. That's the difference. It was Nixon.
Sure. But even the whole idea in the media in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s was if you're in power, our job is to challenge you. We don't care who you are.
Right.
And politicians were universally afraid. LBJ hated the media as much as Nixon did. Because if you were in power and you were doing something that you weren't supposed to be doing or we didn't like, we're coming after you. That was the mindset. So how does the New York Times respond to this huge expose? Over the weekend, over Super Bowl weekend, they come up with an article that headline reads, Special Counsel Report Went Off the Rails, Biden Lawyer Says. So the Biden lawyers say he's off the rails, and they give us a full reporting in the New York Times about how this happened, and it was illegitimate, and it was wrong, and they attack the report, and defend Biden. Poor old Joe. Mrs. Biden comes out, and she attacks them as attacking her husband. How dare they talk about the loss of our family and Bo, and how dare they? Why was that even brought up? Poor old Joe. All the Podesta forces and all the mainstream media rally behind Joe. So I'm looking at who wrote this article for the New York Times. His name is Zolan Cano-Youngs.
Oh, that's today's Woodward and Bernstein, right?
Zolan Cano-Youngs. He's defining the reality of the special counsel report. He's the guy that is given this task. So I figure, okay, this guy must be a lawyer. He must have great background, great credentials. So I look him up. He's 30-something. He's got zero legal background. He started off as a sports writer. The biggest place you're going to find his bio is on the Sports Journal Institute. This is the guy they select to write the piece. That's Burns. That's Woodward. What is going on here?
I was going to say, isn't it ironic? The sports guy isn't writing about sports on a Super Bowl weekend. He's writing to defend Joe Biden in a political nightmare. I can't make this up.
That's it. The irony around Super Bowl weekend just doesn't die. That's it.
But here's the problem. You can play these kinds of desperate defense games in court. It usually doesn't work with the jury. Does it work with the jury in the courtroom of public opinion? Everybody believes he's too old. Everybody sees through to the heart of this, that at the end of the day, he did the exact same thing Donald Trump did. Donald Trump got charged. He didn't. And then if you dig for the reason why, this guy didn't even remember when he was vice president. This guy doesn't even remember within 2 years of when his son died. He's not cognitively fit to stand trial. Okay, then he's not cognitively fit to be president. Either way, you walk into a February surprise. Either way, you can't have it both ways.
I hate to sound and end with a cliche, but you can't make this stuff up.
No, it's funnier than Saturday Night Live, but it's tragic, unfortunately. These kinds of games are coming from the cockpit, and we're all on the plane together.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.